Alongside Jennifer Hedger and Rod Smith, we have a few things in common. First and foremost, that we were lucky enough to be dear friends of Dutch. Also, that we all got to co-host Sports Desk or Sports Center with him. 3 of many co-hosts he had. He was the one constant. We changed through the years, but he was the one constant. And I guess the third thing was we never were able to get in a word in the chats that we had on Sports Center at the beginning of the show or the end, because if you didn't talk first, you were not going to. You were not going to talk. We have Kleenexes here ready. Feel free to use them, but we just want to tell some stories about our guy. He was one of a guy. The problem with telling stories about Dutch is most of them we can't tell, because 95% of all Dutch stories.
What you are seeing now is the edited version.
Highly edited version. He was crass, but in the most lovable. He was so inappropriate, but in the most lovable way possible.
He always got away with it, though.
Right.
You know, the thing that the Dutch, and I mean, there's so much to get into and talk about, but that sense of bravado and inner confidence that he had. And I remember, I mean, there were lots of times, but I remember being at Grey Cup in Edmonton, and the Prime Minister is there, right? Stephen Harper was the Prime Minister at the time. And we hear, oh, the Prime Minister's here. And Dutch goes, well, I'm going to go up and say hi to him. And I was like, Dutch, you can't just walk up to the Prime Minister and say hi. And damned if he didn't go through, stick his hand out and, hey, Stephen, I'm Dutch. And when we do the Raptors, when they won the title, and Drake was set up at the
Hey, Drake.
Seriously, he just goes up, hey, Drake, Dutchie. And I'm just like, Drake doesn't want to be introduced to you, Dutchie. And Dutch goes, he should want to talk to me. And he was kind of right, you know, like all of these huge figures that I think that we've met over the years, and Dutch would walk right out and put his hand out and end up having a conversation with them, and they'd be fast friends by the end of it.
The thing I liked about him, what you touch upon so much, that you'd have new people in the newsroom, and they're right out of school, and they're nervous, and even before I had a chance to talk to any of them, he already knew their name, knew their hometown, knew where they went to school, most importantly, knew what their favorite team was, only because he could bust their chops if that team played badly. And he got along well with everyone in the newsroom. He didn't think he was better than anybody else, and I think he could be among kings, queens, and heads of state, and he would treat them all the same way as he would anybody that he worked with. He was very personal that way. And you know, I had 2 co-hosts in my time on the desk before going solo after Jim Van Horn left on SportsCenter. So it was back in the Sports Desk days, and the 2 hosts were Darren Dutchyshen and James Duthie. And they're 2 of the funniest guys that I've ever not only worked with, ever met. But the way they made me laugh was so different. With him, I'd be envious of the ideas he'd come up with. I gladly would have said them if I could have thought of them, but I didn't. I wasn't smart enough to think of these comedic guys with Duthie. With Dutch, I thought some of those things, but I didn't have the guts to say them. And when he said them, and like the things a lot of people would be thinking, and he said it in such an outrageous way, I just sometimes couldn't keep myself together on air. I'd just be thinking, part of it laughing, part of it like,
almost like, oh my God,
did he actually say that? I'd be horrified, but that was part of it.
If we were to roll out a best of tape, like some of the stuff he got away with back in the day that he couldn't. One of his famous lines ever, Edgar Renteria hits a home run and Dutch goes, Renteria gone. It rhymes with a certain disease. And
Aria.
I tell you, when it was, by the way, it was very intimidating. I replaced you as Dutchie's co-host, and I was one of the most scared nights ever, because he was such a massive presence, and sitting beside him, both in stature, and I was just a slight little guy.
He was just big.
Huge.
But he was so welcoming right away, like he was your partner from day one. But I really got to know him at the 2000. Well, I knew him before this, but the 2006 World Juniors. I brought my kids out in Vancouver. And they were young, so like 3, 4, and 6, I think. And right away on the plane, he saw them and started coming back and talking to them. And it was Uncle Dutchie right away. They were Uncle Dutchie. So one day we're in the hot tub, and my 3 kids are in the hot tub, and Dutchie's in there, and he says, hey, kids, can Uncle Dutchie tell you a secret? They're like, yeah. He goes, I just peed in the hot tub. He goes, "You can do it too. It's okay." I'm like, "No, Dutch.
No, it's totally not
tell
okay.
him this.
Well, the idea of Dutch being in a hot tub makes me think, well, it was an opportunity for him to take his shirt off.
Of course.
Right? Because you don't need to
He liked to pose.
Dutch didn't need to be at a beach to take off his shirt, and he didn't need to be asked twice to take off his shirt. But that guy worked out and was so disciplined, and nobody loved being known for being muscular more than Dutch did. Nobody wore a tighter golf shirt to a golf tournament or a thinner golf shirt.
But he was also very
Dutch did.
self-deprecating
He
about
totally
it. It's not
was.
like there was ego with it, but he always kind of made fun of
He
himself
was
at
in
the
on the
same
joke.
time. He was in on the
totally in on the baby gap.
He was a
shirts.
character, and I think he realized he was a
Yeah.
character, and I think he played it.
Well, he'd come in. One of the famous traits about Dutch is every night he would come in with one story or one joke, and he would tell every single person that same story and joke with as much passion.
Yeah.
He did.
I would look at him and go, "This must be exhausting,"
Yeah.
because he'd tell it 50 times.
And have no shame that other people who had already heard the joke were hearing him tell it to the other group over there, and the engineer down the hall, and now he's telling the camera person
And the makeup person.
and the makeup
And
person.
one of the ones he did every year, early spring, he'd come in and say, "It's officially spring, first day running with the shirt off through Aurora. It's a tradition." Says all the housewives go to the windows and get all worked up about it.
And walking in to work every night, the Dutchism, there's so many Dutchisms, he would walk in with a plastic grocery bag, not a proper lunch bag, plastic grocery bag, with enough produce to feed a family for a week. There'd be like 3 oranges, couple of bananas, can of tuna, protein bar, and then his BioSteel container that would have some obnoxious concoction of creatine and whatever else in it. And he would eat all of that after dinner and before the show. And then we would get up to do the show, and literally a block in, he'd be like, "I'm hungry. Are you hungry, Hedge?" I'm like, "No, dude. You just ate the half of the produce section at the grocery store before the show." And that was he was a finely tuned machine, and he fed it.
He was, and as said, he was, as mentioned before, one of the funniest guys I knew. And he would, if he sensed he had you, and I don't know if this happened to either of you on the air, that if he sensed he had you and you're going to lose it, you're going to break up laughing, he tried even harder to get you to laugh. And sometimes, and I was always like the serious guy. He got the fun stories, I got the more serious stories. And he did or said something that I was tired, it was late at night, and I was cracking up. And I had something serious, so I come on camera, and I tripped over a couple of words. And I was horrified, because this is not a story that's, to be joked with. And I could just feel the blood running through, as I tried to gather myself again. And I, out of the side, my peripheral vision, I could see he had script over his face, and I just saw this.
The bouncing up and down the chair beside
which
you.
made it that much harder. But he loved stuff like that. He was a prankster too, and he loved a good joke. And if he sensed that he could make his co-host uncomfortable in terms of laughing and things like that, I think he'd go for it. Certainly had a lot of luck with me that way.
There are so many stories. He was known mostly for hosting The Desk, but he did do some play-by-play stuff. And he did soccer, I believe, at the Summer Canada Games way back when. And it was a hot day, and he's wearing a suit like this. And he got hot in the booth, so he just took off his pants.
Pants right off.
Pants right off, and just did. Well, I mean underwear.
Yeah.
But just did the entire game with his pants off, and with no, just showing off the legs. Right?
He's like, which was the other joke, right? Is like, Dutch, you always skipped leg day because the legs never quite matched the upper body.
Yeah.
The upper body was massive, the legs weren't quite as massive. But it's the whole, like, you can take the boy out of Sasky, but you can't take the Sasky out of the boy. And like there are just like Dutchisms. I think about certain words he pronounced, and I think of it as just being his Sasky accent, but like if he was, like for the highlights, if he was like, oh, Korea winds up, buries it.
He buries it,
He
right?
buries it, right? And I'm like, Dutchie, it's bury. And he's like, no, it's bury. And it's buries it. And get the flippers off, right?
Back-to-back jacks.
Exactly.
Chucking the knuckles.
Chucking the knuckles. And I'll be your Huckleberry.
That's right.
There's no angle? Dangle.
He was the most passionate sportscaster I've ever met. We all love our jobs, but no one loved coming in and doing that. SportsCenter is a grind. I felt burnout after a couple of years. I know you've been doing it for a long time as well. But he did this for 30 years to go in there every night almost as excited as the night before, just to do highlights for people is just remarkable to me. And the way, the passion that you saw on air was the same way he was if you met him in person. In every single, like larger than life is an overused phrase, but it is so perfect for him. Because every single time he walked into this studio, any studio, he took it over.
I had the pleasure, as I'm sure you did, to have a beer with him, have a drink with him on occasion, and said this in his obit, that it was honestly like constantly, whether you were with him, working, co-hosting with him, watching him do his thing from home, I always felt like it was like having a beer with a friend.
Yeah.
And he did. He got so engrossed in every highlight that he ever talked about. And I thought he was just a master at it.
He loved it. He loved it. I talk about when people are like, what's it like hosting with Dutch? It's like trying to walk a Rottweiler and you're just hanging on for dear life, right? Hoping that you're going to get through the show and get through the walk unscathed. He was so enthusiastic about his job, and the greatest gift that he gave, I think, me and everyone at TSN was the year he came back after his first cancer treatment. The guy didn't know how much time he was going to have left, and he decided he wanted to come back and host SportsCenter and be in the newsroom and work with the producers and work with the guys on the highlight row. And Dutchie did not have a bad day. There were no bad days for a guy who was battling cancer and knew he was losing the battle. And what a gift it was for the rest of us who got to work with him, who get so caught up in the minutia of life and politics and, you know, all the other stuff that we complain about all the time. And that guy bounced in every night and was like, Hedge, do we got the greatest gig or what?
Wow.
Yeah.
I saw that show, this first one back with you, and I had so much admiration for the way he handled it, the way he spoke quite bravely, I thought, about what he's been through and how tough the road ahead was going to be for him. And I thought he handled that so well. And you're right. I mean, in some ways, same old Dutch. I got a chance. I hadn't seen him in a long time after his diagnosis. And then he hadn't come to work in, well, he had, I think, a year off. Yeah. And he was with Kate at Touchdown Atlantic, and they invited me to dinner. And I hadn't seen him in a long time, and I was a bit nervous. You know,
probably thought you were going to pick up the bill. That's why he invited you.
Who knows? Well, you know, his appetite was strong, and we had a great time. But I didn't know, you know what I mean, how to handle it. He's been quite ill, and would he be the same guy? And Kate says to me, "It's just the three of us at one point are sitting down in this restaurant at Halifax Harbor," and Kate said, "So how you doing? How's everything going?" And I said, "Oh, you know, it's going well. It's a lot of fun. It can be a bit of a grind." And all of a sudden he chirps in and he goes, "What?" And I said, "No, I'm just saying work-wise can be a bit of a..." He goes, "What? You're a bleeping sportscaster." Tell me about your, you know, but it was so true that he had that attitude, like life's great.
Perspective.
Cherish it. Oh. Total perspective. But he did it in a way that made me laugh, as he often did. And then the rest of the night, the stories, one or two of them maybe clean, mostly inappropriate, but funny, and I laughed. I felt like I laughed for an hour and a half, and it was so good to see him again and spend that time with him.
I went through our text chains from the last couple of years last night and laughed out loud 20 times.
Yeah.
There was just never complaining. He was so positive about everything until the end, and knew he may not have much time, but he went to got to, you know, Kate helped him take his sons to the Masters last year, I think it was, and he was so happy to be able to do that. And that's the one thing, like, we talk about how much he loves sportscasting. Nothing he loved more than those kids. Like, I felt they were growing up when I was hosting with them, and I felt like I knew Tyler, Brett, Paige. That's all he talked about.
Yeah. They all were there at the King's Plate, which is the last live event that Dutch and I got to do together in August. And Tyler and Brett and Paige showed up, and Paige had her beautiful hat on, and the kids were all there, and they just stood off set and watched us, you know, do that broadcast, obviously knowing that there weren't going to be a lot of those left. And he was beaming with pride that his kids were there and that he could introduce them to some of the people around us. And I mean, Dutch at the ponies. come on, right? Like, he was in his element there at Woodbine. He loved horse racing.
Yeah.
He loved the culture around it. You know, I know he had some buddies who owned horses.
Loved to dress up.
He loved to dress up. He loved the gambling. He loved the talk, you know, the chit chat and the banter. Yeah. And he was really at home at the racetrack.
Yeah. He was the best, and we'll be telling stories for years about our friend Dutch.
You know, I used to, as a final thought for me, I used to, sometimes I'd get annoyed when I worked with a couple of guys who were much funnier than I am, that I'd go in and I'd look at the lineup, and if there was a funny story or a great kicker, a kicker being a comedic ending to the show, he always got them. He got all the funny things. And if there was anything, you know, if there's any, all the more serious items, including obits, I usually got them, and I accepted that, and I loved the chemistry that I had with them. I loved working with them, and this was the one obit I wish I never had to do.
Yeah, my final thought would just be that you know, I had a front row seat to the greatest guy to ever do it, and I got to tell him that in person, and it certainly wasn't lip service. He was the best to do the job, and he made literally thousands of people want to do the job because they saw him do it. And he read the highlights the best. He reinvigorated and really created the role of what a sportscaster is. And I had the best seat in the house to watch him do it for 20 years. So I could not thank him more for his friendship.
We love you, buddy, and we'll miss you.